I'll give you a choice. Either I can shoot, if you want to shoot, ready now, I'll shoot you right now.
On the 14th of December, 2025, the LAPD cordoned off a home in Brentwood. Inside, Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, were found dead. The medical examiner later ruled the deaths homicides, caused by multiple sharp force injuries. Since then, their son, Nick Reiner, has been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. So what happened inside that house, and how did it reach this point? The story of his downfall didn't begin with a tragedy. It began with his bloodline. Rob Reiner was born in the Bronx, but in reality, he was born into a giant shadow. His father was Carl Reiner, a television titan, a living legend who turned comedy into high mathematics. For young Rob, home wasn't a sanctuary, it was a boot camp. While other kids were out playing ball, he was on the sidelines, absorbing the rhythm of dialogue, realizing early on that laughter was the only way to force people to hear the cold, hard truth. But being the son of a genius is a twisted trap. Rob grew up feeling like he was just taking up space. To the outside world, he was the golden boy of show business, but inside, he felt like a total fraud. He wasn't the athlete, he wasn't the leader, he was the eternal observer standing on the shoulder of someone else's success. It was there, deep in his father's shadow, that he honed his most dangerous skill, watching people from the outside, dissecting their weaknesses and their fears. He couldn't hide forever. In 1971, Reiner stepped into the spotlight in All in the Family. This marked his first open war with the establishment. He landed the role of Michael Meathead Stivic, the liberal son-in-law perpetually locking horns with his conservative father-in-law. To the audience at home, it was just a sitcom. But for Reiner, that set was a battlefield. He was young, angry, and a nightmare for the suits in charge. He refused to read lines if they felt fake. He demanded his characters speak about racism, about Vietnam, about the things that were actually tearing America apart at the seams. It was clear even then, Rob Reiner wasn't built to keep his mouth shut for anyone's comfort, but the role of Meathead became his prison. He realized he had spent 8 years arguing with the same fictional enemy, repeating the same points. To break the cycle, he decided to gamble his entire future, walking away from a massive hit into the unknown, just to get behind the camera. Hollywood watched his ambition with a cynical smirk. A sitcom actor thinking he can direct? In this industry, that kind of ego trip usually ends in a humiliating crash and burn. Reiner knew the score. To survive the machine, he bet everything on total control, founding his own studio, Castle Rock. He wasn't chasing power, he was chasing a voice, the same right to be heard he'd been fighting for since the writers' rooms of network TV. What happened next was one of the most insane winning streaks in cinema history. Reiner started playing genres like a card shark with a stacked deck. First, he dropped This Is Spinal Tap, a chaotic improvisation that blurred the line between fact and fiction, practically inventing the language of the mockumentary. While critics were still scratching their heads, he pivoted hard, hitting the audience's raw nerves with Stand By Me. No monsters, no special effects, just 4 boys, and that heavy sense of loss that everyone remembers. It seemed like the guy couldn't miss. You want a fairy tale? He gave the world The Princess Bride, a movie people are still quoting 40 years later. You want a conversation about adult love? When Harry Met Sally didn't just work, it rewrote the rules of the romantic comedy. You want fear? He locked the audience in a room with a psychopath in Misery and handed Kathy Bates an Oscar. By the time A Few Good Men hit theaters, Reiner wasn't just a director. He was at the top of the food chain, raking in hundreds of millions at the box office. But that triumph was exactly the trap. The top is the loneliest and most dangerous place to be. The whispers started behind his back. He's just getting lucky. It's the actors, not him. Reiner was caught in the golden cage of his own success, where every next step had to be a masterpiece. And in 1994, the floor fell out. The movie North wasn't just a flop, it was a catastrophe. Critics didn't just dislike it, they annihilated it. The legendary Roger Ebert turned his review into a public execution that is still in the history books. Overnight, Reiner's Teflon shield shattered. He learned the brutal truth of the business. The system forgives everything while you're making money. but it will eat you alive at the first sign of weakness. His credit was gone. And as Hollywood started to turn its cold shoulder, Reiner decided that if they wouldn't let him fight in the movies, he'd find a new war in the real world. When Hollywood politely hinted that his time was up, Rob Reiner made a choice that sealed his fate. Instead of fading into the sunset with a Lifetime Achievement Award, he chose open war. He stopped hiding behind fictional characters. He ripped off the mask and stepped into an arena with no scripts, no second takes, and absolutely no mercy. The blood sport of political information warfare. The transformation was jarring. The man who taught America how to laugh and love morphed into a bare-knuckle brawler. Social media became his new front line, and his weapon was a lack of filter honed back in the All in the Family days. His attacks on Donald Trump were expected, but the sheer ferocity shocked even his allies. Reiner stopped being a director of nuance. He became a soldier who saw the world only in black and white. But the real fracture happened when Reiner turned friendly fire on his own camp. In 2024, he publicly called for Joe Biden to drop out of the race. To the Democratic establishment, this wasn't advice. It was a knife in the back at the 11th hour. The people who called him a hero yesterday were calling him a traitor today. The media tore him apart. A rich, Hollywood elitist preaching from his ivory tower in Brentwood, dictating how the rest of the country should live. The kindly storyteller image was dead and buried. But that was just surface noise. While the public argued over his tweets, Reiner was diving into a much darker, more dangerous rabbit hole. He stepped past modern politics and ripped open America's deepest unhealed scar, the assassination of President John Kennedy. This wasn't a retiree's hobby, it was an obsession. For years, he claimed the official lone gunman narrative was a lie sold to keep the public asleep. He threw his weight and his wallet into the Who Killed John Kennedy podcast, teaming up with journalists to dig up ballistics and classified files that the powers that be had tried to bury for decades. The line between director and activist vanished. Reiner was playing detective, splicing facts together like film reels. But this time, the stakes weren't box office receipts. They were the credibility of the entire government. Critics branded him a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, spreading chaos. Supporters saw the only man with the cash and the guts to ask the questions everyone else was too scared to touch. To the system, he was no longer the conscience of the nation. He was a liability. By 2025, Rob Reiner had burned every bridge back to his safe Hollywood life. He traded universal adoration for the right to doubt, and perhaps it was that refusal to back down, that insistence on knocking on doors meant to stay bolted shut, that led him directly to that fatal night. On the night of December 14, 2025, the quiet privilege of Brentwood was shattered by the wail of sirens. When the first responders breached the door, they walked into a nightmare that defied description. Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were gone. There were no final words. No dignified Hollywood fade to black. Just raw, senseless brutality. A frenzy of violence that left their bodies broken and the room soaked in blood. Detectives are still tight-lipped about the exact motive, but for the rest of the world, this is more than just another grisly headline on the evening news. It is a seismic cultural shock that we haven't even begun to process. The man who spent a lifetime teaching us through his art that any conflict could be resolved with dialogue, that we could hear each other across the divide, died in a cold reality where words had absolutely no power. Rob Reiner leaves behind a filmography that needs no defense. Those movies are already immortal. But his true legacy is the man himself, uncomfortable, loud, and obsessed with the truth until his final breath. He refused to be remembered, just as the gentle architect of The Princess Bride. He chose to be the agitator, the one asking the questions that make everyone else look away. His death serves as the final, darkest paradox of his life. The man who gave us America's warmest stories is gone, leaving us alone to face a chilling reality. Kindness creates no safety net, and the search for truth can cost you your life.